In the crypto world, there are a handful of names that everyone still argues about, but there's one name that comes up more than any other, usually followed by a long pause, and then someone saying, "Yeah, but how did nobody catch this sooner?" That name is Sam Bankman-Fried, and the company he built, FTX. Here's the number that still doesn't quite make sense, no matter how many times you hear it. In January 2022, FTX was valued at $32 billion. 11 months later, it was bankrupt, and investigators were trying to figure out where up to $9 billion of customer money had actually gone. Not lost in some market crash everyone could see coming. Just gone. Moved somewhere it wasn't supposed to be. This is the full story of how that happened. Not the sanitized headline version, but the actual sequence of decisions, relationships, and warning signs that got ignored, one after another, until there was nothing left to ignore. Sam Bankman-Fried didn't come out of nowhere. Before any of this, he was a Wall Street trader, and before that, the son of 2 Stanford law professors, which matters a little more than it sounds like, because it shaped how people initially perceived him, not as some reckless gambler, but as someone who seemed to genuinely understand risk, math, and markets at a deep level. In 2019, he teamed up with a former Google employee named Gary Wang, and together they founded FTX, a cryptocurrency exchange, essentially a platform where people could buy, sell, and trade crypto. But here's the detail that matters more than people realize looking back. Bankman-Fried had already founded a separate company a year earlier, in 2017, called Alameda Research, a crypto trading firm. And that relationship between these two companies, FTX the exchange and Alameda the trading firm, is really where this entire story lives. Everything that happened later comes back to the blurry, tangled line between those two entities. Now here's where it gets almost dizzying, because the speed of FTX's rise is honestly hard to overstate. In July 2021, FTX closed a $900 million funding round that valued the company at $18 billion. That's already an enormous number for a company that was barely 2 years old, but it kept climbing. By January 2022, after raising $400 million more from investors, FTX's valuation hit $32 billion. And the investors weren't small names either. We're talking SoftBank, Singapore's sovereign wealth fund, Temasek, Sequoia Capital, BlackRock, Tiger Global. These are some of the most sophisticated, well-resourced investment firms on the planet, the kind of firms with entire teams dedicated to due diligence, to digging into a company's books before they write a check. And they all wrote the check. FTX didn't just raise money quietly either. It spent aggressively on becoming a mainstream household name. They signed a deal for the naming rights to the Miami Heat's home arena, $135 million. They partnered with the Mercedes Formula One team. NBA superstar Stephen Curry became a brand ambassador, reportedly paid $35 million for what amounted to about 20 hours of work a year over 3 seasons. Tom Brady, Gisele Bündchen, Kevin O'Leary from Shark Tank. FTX's logo was suddenly everywhere, including, memorably, a Super Bowl commercial in 2022 that told viewers not to miss out on crypto the way people once missed out on the internet. And through all of this, Bankman-Fried himself became a kind of character in the story. Famously disheveled, always in shorts and a t-shirt even in boardrooms, tousled curly hair, presenting himself less like a Wall Street villain and more like an awkward genius who happened to stumble into billions of dollars while trying to do good in the world. He talked publicly, a lot, about something called effective altruism, the idea of earning as much money as possible specifically so you could give enormous amounts of it away to worthy causes. It was a compelling story. People wanted to believe it. Forbes put him on a cover. He was included in their 30 under 30 list. Politicians took meetings with him. He was, by every outward appearance, one of the good guys in an industry that desperately wanted a good guy. Here's the thing about a company moving this fast, signing this many deals, raising this much money. Almost nobody stops to ask the boring, unglamorous question, are the books actually in order? And in FTX's case, that question mattered more than almost anyone realized, because FTX was a private company, which meant its financial statements were never subject to the kind of independent, rigorous auditing that public companies go through. There was no external check making sure the money moving around actually matched what the company was telling investors and customers. And quietly, underneath all the sponsorship deals and celebrity endorsements, something specific was happening. Customer funds, money that people had deposited onto the FTX exchange to trade cryptocurrency, were being funneled into Alameda Research, the separate trading firm Bankman-Fried also controlled. This wasn't supposed to happen. An exchange is supposed to be like a marketplace, holding customer funds safely so people can trade. It's not supposed to be quietly lending that money to a hedge fund on the side, especially not a hedge fund owned by the same person running the exchange. But that's exactly what was happening, largely hidden from public view, for a long time. Even before the collapse, there were small warning signs if you knew where to look. In August 2022, a U.S. bank regulator actually ordered FTX to stop making false and misleading claims about whether customer funds on the platform were government-insured. That's a genuinely serious accusation, but at the time, it barely made a dent in FTX's public reputation. The story of the Golden Boy genius was simply too good, too convenient for people to want to dig deeper. Every rise and fall story eventually reaches its inciting incident, the one moment where the illusion starts to crack. For FTX, that moment has an exact date, November 2nd, 2022. That's the day CoinDesk, a crypto news outlet, published an article based on a leaked balance sheet from Alameda Research. What that balance sheet revealed was quietly alarming to anyone who actually understood what they were looking at. A significant portion of Alameda's assets weren't cash or established cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin. They were FTT, a token that FTX itself had created, essentially their own in-house currency, primarily used to give traders discounted fees on the exchange. The problem is that FTT wasn't easily convertible to real cash at scale. If you tried to sell a massive amount of it all at once, its value would collapse because there simply wasn't enough real demand to absorb that kind of sell-off. So on paper, Alameda looked like it had billions of dollars in assets. In reality, a huge chunk of that was essentially monopoly money that FTX had printed itself. This detail might sound technical, almost boring, but it was the loose thread that unraveled the entire sweater, because it meant that two supposedly separate companies, the exchange and the trading firm, were far more tangled together than anyone on the outside had understood. What happened next moved terrifyingly fast, especially for something involving $32 billion. On November 6th, 4 days after the CoinDesk article, Changpeng Zhao, the CEO of Binance, FTX's biggest rival, and notably one of FTX's own early investors, tweeted that Binance would be selling off all of its FTT holdings, citing what he called recent revelations. Binance was holding roughly $2 billion worth of FTT at the time. That single tweet was essentially a match thrown onto dry grass. The tweet triggered immediate panic. FTX customers, suddenly worried the exchange might not actually have the funds to cover their deposits, started demanding withdrawals en masse all at once. This is what's sometimes called a bank run. And unlike a regular bank, which is required to keep enough reserves and often has government backing to handle exactly this scenario, a crypto exchange has no such safety net. There's no FDIC insurance in crypto. If too many people ask for their money back at the same time, and the money isn't actually all sitting there, the whole thing collapses. On November 7th, Bankman-Fried tweeted, trying to calm the storm, "FTX is fine, assets are fine." Reassuring words, except behind the scenes, they weren't fine at all. Bankman-Fried was scrambling, ordering Alameda to sell off assets as fast as possible to try to cover the growing wave of withdrawals, and simultaneously trying to find emergency financing to plug what was, by that point, an $8 billion gap between what FTX owed its customers and what it could actually pay out. On November 8th, just 2 days after that initial tweet, Binance's CEO announced they had signed a non-binding agreement to acquire FTX entirely, essentially a rescue deal. Binance stepping in to absorb the sinking company and, in theory, make customers whole. For about 24 hours, it looked like there might be a resolution, however humbling for Bankman-Fried personally. But it didn't last. The very next day, Binance walked away from the deal entirely, saying that after looking more closely at FTX's actual situation and learning about the ongoing U.S. investigations into how customer funds had been handled, they weren't willing to move forward. FTX had officially run out of lifelines. On November 11th, 2022, FTX, Alameda Research, and more than 100 affiliated entities filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. Bankman-Fried resigned as CEO that same day, replaced by John J. Ray III, a name that carries a specific heavy weight in the corporate world, because Ray was the same executive who had steered the notorious energy company Enron through its own bankruptcy proceedings decades earlier. Bringing him in to clean up FTX was, in itself, a signal of exactly how serious this situation was believed to be. And what the new team found once they got access to FTX's actual internal systems was, by their own account, almost unbelievable. There was essentially no real accounting infrastructure. Corporate funds had reportedly been used to purchase homes and other personal items for executives, with what investigators later described as inadequate record-keeping. Billions of dollars in customer deposits, money people believed was simply sitting safely in their exchange accounts, had instead been used to fund Alameda's trading positions, venture investments, political donations, and lavish spending, all without those customers' knowledge or consent. On top of the bankruptcy chaos, there was one more twist. On November 12th, Reuters reported that at least $1 billion of customer funds appeared to have simply vanished, with blockchain analysts eventually tracing between $473 million and $659 million moved in what they called suspicious circumstances, essentially unauthorized transactions happening in the very midst of the collapse, as if someone, somewhere, was still trying to move money out the door before everything shut down completely. The damage didn't stay contained to FTX. Bankman-Fried's own personal net worth, estimated at around $16 billion before all of this began, was essentially wiped out within days. Major institutional investors, Sequoia Capital, SoftBank, Temasek, BlackRock, Tiger Global, all had to write down their investments, in some cases to zero. Sequoia alone wrote off roughly $214 million and quietly scrubbed a glowing profile of Bankman-Fried they'd previously published on their own website. The broader cryptocurrency market took a serious hit too. Bitcoin fell to its lowest price in 2 years as the panic spread. Other crypto lenders and platforms that had exposure to FTX or Alameda started wobbling as well. Genesis, a crypto lending firm, filed for its own bankruptcy in January 2023, owing creditors nearly $3.5 billion. The entire industry, already viewed skeptically by a lot of the public, took a reputational hit that arguably still hasn't fully healed. In December 2022, Bankman-Fried was arrested in the Bahamas and extradited to the United States to face charges of fraud, conspiracy, and money laundering. He pleaded not guilty, and the case went to trial in October 2023. Throughout the trial, some of Bankman-Fried's closest colleagues, including Caroline Ellison, who had been CEO of Alameda Research, along with Gary Wang and Nishad Singh, pleaded guilty to their own roles in defrauding FTX's customers, and testified that it was Bankman-Fried himself who had directed them to commit the fraud. When Bankman-Fried took the stand in his own defense, he offered a very different account, describing the collapse as a series of mistakes and miscalculations rather than deliberate theft, essentially arguing this was catastrophic mismanagement, not intentional fraud. The jury didn't agree. On November 2nd, 2023, almost exactly 1 year to the day after that original CoinDesk article was published, Bankman-Fried was found guilty on all 7 counts of fraud and conspiracy. In March 2024, a federal judge sentenced him to 25 years in prison. Prosecutors had actually pushed for a far harsher sentence, somewhere between 40 and 50 years, calling it one of the largest financial frauds in American history. The judge's final words on the matter were blunt. This was a very serious crime. So where does this leave the number we started with? $32 billion and up to $9 billion in missing customer funds. The honest answer is complicated and still evolving even now. A significant portion of what was lost wasn't necessarily stolen and hidden away in some secret account. A lot of it had been spent on failed trading strategies at Alameda, on venture investments that didn't pan out, on those massive celebrity endorsement deals and stadium naming rights, on office spaces and parties and political donations meant to buy influence and legitimacy. In the years since the bankruptcy, the recovery team overseeing FTX's estate has actually made significant progress clawing back assets and recovering value, to the point where they've stated they expect to be able to repay customers a substantial portion, in some cases potentially the full dollar value of what they lost at the time of the collapse, though many affected customers argue that doesn't come close to accounting for what that money would have been worth if crypto and other assets had simply been allowed to grow over the years the case dragged on. If there's one thing that makes the FTX story different from a typical company went bankrupt headline, it's this. Almost every institution that exists specifically to catch this kind of thing missed it. Sophisticated venture capital firms with entire due diligence teams missed it. Regulators mostly missed it, at least until it was already collapsing. Financial journalists, for the most part, missed it, charmed by the same disheveled genius narrative everyone else bought into. Even FTX's own employees, thousands of them, apparently had no idea how deep the problem actually went until the final days. The uncomfortable lesson underneath all of this isn't really about cryptocurrency specifically. It's about what happens when a company's public image, the celebrity endorsements, the stadium deals, the philanthropic language, the aura of genius, gets treated as a substitute for actual verification. Nobody wanted to be the person asking uncomfortable questions about a company that seemed to be printing money and giving huge chunks of it away to good causes. And that reluctance to ask the boring, unglamorous questions is exactly the gap that let this go on as long as it did. So that's the complete arc. From a Wall Street trader and a Google engineer founding an exchange in 2019, to a $32 billion valuation and Super Bowl commercials, to a single leaked balance sheet unraveling the entire structure in less than 2 weeks, to a courtroom sentencing that closed the chapter, at least legally, on one of the largest financial frauds in American history. What stays with people about this story isn't really the size of the number, even though $32 billion is almost impossible to picture. It's how ordinary the warning signs actually were, in hindsight. An unaudited private company, a founder controlling 2 supposedly separate businesses, assets that weren't as liquid as they appeared on paper. None of that required special expertise to notice. It just required someone to actually look. If you found this breakdown valuable, let me know in the comments what part of this story surprised you the most. And if you want more deep, fully researched breakdowns like this one, hit like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.